Welcome to the Steady On Stronger Together podcast. I am your host, Angie Bauman. My guest today is popular author and blogger Ruth Schwenk, and she joins me to talk about her most recent book, In a Boat in the Middle of a Lake, that she co-authored with her husband, Patrick. In the book, Pat and Ruth talk about how God is faithful in the midst of our painful stories. And through our discussion, Ruth shares openly about her own experiences, as well as using scripture to continually point us back to Jesus. I was honored to be able to spend this time with Ruth and encouraged by what she shared. Let's listen in. Good morning, Steady On friends. Welcome to this really special to me conversation that we're going to have this morning with my guest, Ruth Schwenk. Ruth, thank you so much for your time this morning. We are delighted to be able to spend a little bit of time with you and talk about your new book, In a Boat in the Middle of a Lake, which I was just privileged, delighted to be able to serve on that launch team and just get to know you a little bit and your story. I first met you I put in quotes actually, at She Speaks 2019. I attended there in North Carolina and heard you speak in a breakout group. And I thought, I like this girl. So I'm just delighted to meet you and be able to spend a little time with you. And for those of you who are watching maybe and want to know a little bit more about Ruth, she is wife to Patrick, who's the co-author of this book. And tell me, is this the first project you've done together, or have you done others? I don't even know.
We have done others. We did a marriage and parenting book several years ago.
And your marriage survives co-authoring then?
Yeah, it does. Actually, it works really well. We have a system.
Awesome.
So it survives. Yeah.
Good. And a good editor, I would hope, that blends things so you don't have to work on that part, right?
Yeah.
And you have 4 kiddos and you're a homeschooling mom, right?
Yeah. I have 4 kids. Our oldest is 18. He graduated from high school this past year. And then we have a 16-year-old girl named Bella, and Noah is 14 and Sophia is 11.
Awesome. So I have a 16 and 11. I don't have the 18 and the 14, but we have similar. I have boys. What's your combination, boys and girls? Can I ask?
So it's boy, girl, boy, girl.
Oh,
2 boys and 2 girls. Yep.
Excellent. Yeah. And you live in Ann Arbor. I have family in Grand Rapids area. I was just up in your neck of the woods actually last weekend. Kind of your neck of the woods. Yeah. But that area of the country anyway. Yeah. It's beautiful up there. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. And Ruth, one of the things that we just want to talk about today is just your willingness to share your faith in God and how that changes and grows through trials. And I really appreciate the voice that you put to miscarriage. I know that you talk about, you have had 5 miscarriages, and I have had a miscarriage. And so for those of us who have been through that, I just really want to say, I appreciate your voice around that, because I think that's something that a lot of times we can feel very alone about, that because it's a suffering that you don't see on the outside, and a lot of people, you don't introduce yourself and, hey, I'm Angie and I've had a miscarriage, it's not. And so, it's just, but it's something that we struggle with. And so I really appreciate you putting voice to that. And then also the most recent book is a lot about your husband's cancer diagnosis at age 43. And just, some of the things, some of that, what I would call, and I think you would too, the messy middle of those trials, where that's where when the trial really pushes on what we believe. And and so your ministry or your website is thebetterlifeministry.com. Is that correct?
That is. Because that website will lead to the different the blogs and also the podcast.
Okay, good. And your fairly new podcast, right? 2020, right? This year. Yeah. Is called Rootlike Faith.
Yep. Rootlike
and you
Faith.
Do that with Patrick?
Pat and I do that together. And there'll be times where we occasionally have a guest, and he usually does that. Sometimes I do it by myself. Sometimes he does it by himself, but we really try to do it together most of the time, because you'll see we're kind of a funny combination. So
I love it. Yes, I love it. How would you describe your husband? Just in a few words.
Oh, wow. Well, I would, when I think of him as a faithful learner. He cannot learn enough about God, and never has been able to. He can't, he's constantly wanting to learn more and grow. And he's a pastor. So we've been in ministry for local church ministry for over 20 years. But I guess that really, when I think about him, if you were around him all the time, you'd always see him with a book or a Bible or a journal, because he really loves the Lord. He can't. And I'm so grateful for that example for our family.
And how would you describe yourself? Because if you say you're a funny couple, I would bet that you have some different tendencies then.
Well, I guess when I say that he's like the well, I shouldn't say this, but he's kind of the more pessimistic and I'm more the optimist, you know. So I'm always seeing the bright side. It's not that bad. And he's, seeing the side that is, the glass half full, and I mean, half empty. I'm seeing it half full. So I think, I don't know. People just laugh. I mean, even just in our regular, local life, the people that are around us, they're always like, oh my word. Like, we just work. I don't know. We work really well together.
Yeah.
And of course, we've been married for a long time now. So, I think that, we're used to one another. I mean, we've been married for 22 years. So
I've been so grateful for my husband. I mean, I am always, because I always am like, he's like this, like stable. He's like Mr. like stable. And I'm sort of like all over the place. And so like, it's good. Like sometimes I poke on him, like, is there anything in there? But often he's like, hey, I think it's not maybe as big a deal as what you're making it, and I think, it's so good.
I feel like with my husband, if you have a question about something, like he's the person to go to that. And I just am so thankful for that, because there's times where I just feel inadequate and unqualified, especially biblically, and so I'm so grateful for that example in my life, where I can say, what does, give me the different views on this. Now let's, because that's hard. I mean, that takes a lot of time digging into all of that. So I am really grateful for that.
Yeah, good. Well, talk to us a little bit about this project, if you will. What's kind of the hope behind it, the motivation for it? Just what's the heart of it from your, just in your own words?
Yeah. Well, in a boat in the middle of a lake, trusting the God who meets us in our storm really came, well, of course, like you already mentioned, came out of that place of suffering. So I do talk about the miscarriages in the book. And we also, of course, more so talk about the journey of cancer over the last few years. And I think, we came from the place where, if you look at Mark 4, in Mark 4, Jesus is teaching the disciples by the lake. And so there's things he's teaching them there. And then he takes them out into the middle of the lake. And then the storm comes, of course, and there's things, we correlate that with our life, that there's things that there's things we learn on the shore, of course, right? When things are, the waves aren't around us and all of that. But then there's some stuff that we don't understand. And we can't learn really until we're in a boat in the middle of a lake, like those disciples were. And so I think, that was kind of, I guess, where we came from with this book, and the whole idea of in a boat in the middle of a lake. Of course, that picture too. I mean, people understand how they feel in the middle of hard stuff, of trials, suffering, whatever it is, struggles, that, we can honestly feel like we're in a boat in the middle of a lake. But then, of course, we actually are using Mark 4 to kind of set the stage for the entire book as well.
I think that's beautiful. And I want to just ask you, was there a period of time, or do you ever struggle with this? Like when one miscarriage after another, and then a cancer diagnosis, and then this time of waiting, and so much, is it hard to relax in your trust? I heard you on something else talk about a verse in Psalms that you like about those who know him will trust in him, right? Yeah. But I think even for those of us who really are serious about our relationship with God and want to trust him, when you're kind of hit with one thing after another on a period of time, it's hard to relax in that. At least it has been for me sometimes. I don't know. Is that been true at all for you?
Well, I remember when I had those 5 miscarriages, and that was a period of about 10 years.
Okay.
Because I was also having children during that time. And there was a few that were like, I was probably 20 weeks along, and there was never an answer. It was always just the heart stopped beating.
Right.
I mean, it was a completely healthy baby. And not that makes it, nothing makes it easier or worse. but I'm saying that because I had no, like, it wasn't like, okay, this makes sense. You know what I mean? There was nothing to give me an answer. And it was like, Lord, like, what do you do in that? You know, Lord, why, what is the point of this? And so, and of course that was a period of about 10 years. So that felt like that would never go on. I remember just emotionally, I mean, never go away. I remember emotionally just being, just overwhelmed and troubled. Of course, you're emotionally not quite all together anyways.
Exactly. Right.
And then down, you know, of course, now you look this, you know, this far forward, and then this happens with Pat. And so I do understand what you're saying, because I think sometimes it's like, oh my word, I can't handle another thing.
Right.
But I feel like that's the reality of life, that we all struggle, we all suffer. And I think when you realize that you're not the only one, like when you come to that point that this really isn't just because it's me, it's just because this is a reality of life.
Yes.
And I think I've also accepted that God uses those struggles in our life to prepare us for what's to come. And so, you know, what I went through with the miscarriages and all of that, I feel like prepares me then for what's ahead, because we will continue, you know, throughout our life. None of us are immune from this. Right. So, you know, eventually I'll have another thing that comes up that's really hard. And not that this totally goes away either. Some of us, it never, you know, it's a lifelong struggle. So I think, I think just trusting that God has a purpose in that, and that really, honestly, it's just a reality of living in a fallen world.
And I totally agree. And I think sometimes that sounds trite. Like this world is not our home. It's a fallen world. The consequences of sin are real. And yet when we do know that, when we do understand that, I do think it helps us with our perspective of actually, this is just part of our experience here while we're on earth, and how we deal with it, and how it changes us, which is kind of the next question that I wanted to go to. How do you feel like God changes us or uses our sufferings and trials to change us so that we are maybe what you're saying, like more prepared, stronger for a better able to witness, you know, those kind of things. What does that look like for y'all?
Well, you mentioned that verse that you've heard me talk about before, and that's Psalm 9:10. Those who know your name trust in you, for you have never forsaken those whose heart is steadfast on you. And I think, or whose heart seeks you. There's a couple different versions there, but that the first part of that verse that says, those who know your name trust in you, that really carried me through, honestly, through the last few years. And it was because it was the reminder to me that because I knew who God was, so because those who know your name, because I knew his character, because I had spent the time getting to know him, because not that this looks perfect, you know, all of this that I shared, none of it ever looks perfect. Right. And it's not some huge giant faith, but this is just a daily living out of following God. And so I knew his character, you know, I knew that he was faithful. I knew that I could trust him in that. I knew that he's a healer, that he's just, that he loves me.
Right.
All of those things, because I knew his name, I could really trust him in that, no matter how hard it was. And I think, you know, that really is really important. And I think what I talk about being prepared, those trials before, I was learning about him then, you know, so that prepares me for what's ahead. And I know him even better because of that. You know, you're not the same person after, everybody would say that you're not the same person after you go through a trial, because you are forced to seek him. You either go towards him or you walk away.
Right.
And, you know, we've seen in being in ministry for over 20 years, I can't even tell you how many people that we've seen who you think are so strong in their faith, and a trial comes and they don't know what to do.
Right.
And that's normal. I'm not saying that's not normal to question and wonder, and but we have to keep seeking him in that. And I think that then at the end, you know, not everybody again has an end, but when the light comes, you know, again, we are able to see that we're a different person, that God has changed us. He's deepened our faith because we had to cling to him. There was nothing else. nowhere else for us to go. And I would say the other area that I feel like this journey, how we have grown, or how I've grown, I guess personally, is it has opened my eyes to the suffering that other people experience.
Yes.
And of course, we've been a part of so many people's lives who have had cancer, who have had all sorts of death, all different things. And this brought that understanding of their suffering to a whole new level.
Yes.
And there were even times that we were like, oh, we've been in ministry for 20 years and I wish I would have really understood this better. But that's okay. I mean, that's how God grows us, obviously, and changes us. But I think it gives you a whole new understanding of the suffering that people face. I mean, I would walk around thinking, you just never know what somebody is going through. You're walking to the grocery store and the person you walk by, you really don't know what they're facing. And so I really, that's one of the greatest gifts, I think, of going through suffering and trials, is it opens your eyes to the other people around you who may be suffering as well.
And I think I want to comment on a couple of things regarding that, because what you're saying right there, I think it also, for me anyway, it has built an assumption that people are going through something hard. And so we just need to approach people with grace, right? Because most likely they're going through something hard. They have old pain, or they have current pain, or they're scared. And that's how we're all functioning. And so I think that there's this grace extension that is so powerful when we can just have it. Right. And also, I think one of the things that you said made me think about this permission that we can give ourselves for struggle and trust at the same time. Like, I used to think that those things shouldn't share space, that if I really trusted, I wouldn't feel like this, but I've since really, I have a better understanding of, sometimes I can be face down in the carpet crying because I want the pain to stop, and calling out to the God that I know is faithful and that I know is trustworthy and I know loves me, those things that you were saying. And I think that's big when we can allow those things to share space. It's been big for me.
Yeah. And I think it's coming to a space, and there's actually a chapter, I think, in the book called "It's Okay Not to Be Okay." Like realizing it's okay not to be okay.
Right.
And that's hard for us. We want to be strong and courageous and have giant faith. And I will be the first one to say that, I don't want to show that things are hard. Again, I told you I'm an optimist. I don't like pain and suffering. Who does? But some people, I feel like, handle it better than others. I don't want to recognize that that's all even there. But, there's times I could only say, literally in my prayers, all I could say was, please, Lord, and I think it's okay, because God, again, uses that to change us and grow us. And we just have to keep seeking after him.
Yeah. And one of the beautiful things about your book, I think, is your willingness to let us peek into that hard spot, that messy middle, if you will, because I think that people actually need to hear more about how we're doing when we don't have all the answers than they need a pretty painted picture on the other side. I believe that to be true. I have some comments. I just want to open our eyes to the suffering of those around us. They're agreeing, open our eyes to others. We never know what people are going through on a daily basis. Lisa says, Cheryl says, yes, approach people with grace. And so, yeah, absolutely. And I failed to mention this at the beginning, but I'm going to give away 2 copies of Ruth's book today from the live comments. And so, so keep commenting and say hello. We've got several people saying hello to you today. So let's talk a little bit about community, because how important do you think community or friendship is when we are in the middle of something? Because especially, like you're saying, if we're hesitant to reveal our struggle, we can be tempted to isolate ourselves, can we not? And and so speak to that for us just a little bit, if you would.
Well, I think we are so grateful that we have community that really surrounded us, showed up, did stuff for us, whether it was, texting, calling, praying for us, cleaning our house, giving us a meal, sending us money. I mean, everything that you can list there. But I would say community is what gets you through. Now, I think you have to choose the people that you surround yourself wisely. Your capacity is so different in a time like this, and that's okay. And so I think you find the people who lift you up, that are going to be there for you, and you just stick with them. I would give you permission in that, because when you're going through suffering, again, you don't have the emotional capacity to handle, I don't know how else to say this, but the more difficult people in your life, or the people that drain you. And so,
or sometimes who are there just to watch. May I say it that way? Right. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I think, and if you have somebody in your life that is going through suffering, I would just encourage you to be the friend that walks toward them and not away from them, because that's what happens in suffering. And I understand, speaking of having grace and being gracious, there's a lot of people that don't know how to handle somebody else's pain. It's just too much. They don't even know what to do with that. And so there will be people in your life, if you are suffering, or you might be the person doing this, that will either walk towards you or walk away from you. And so be the person that walks toward your friend that's in pain. And again, this doesn't have to be complicated. This isn't some complicated, all these things you have to figure out to do for them. Because I think that's what we're always like, well, what can I do? I don't even know what to do. Yeah. And for me, I would say the one thing that sticks out to me, I listed all those things that people did for us, which were amazing. But there was one person in particular who I wasn't even that close of friends with, who literally texted me every single day. And all she did was she let me know that she was praying for us. And sometimes she would send a scripture. Sometimes, a lot of times, all it would say was praying.
Yes.
And I can't even tell you the difference that made in my day, knowing that the burdens I was carrying, somebody else was thinking about.
Someone else was sharing.
Yes, I was not in it alone, like you said before.
Yeah.
And so I think community, we don't realize the power we have just in those simple, like that was just simple. I mean, she was literally sending me a text every day. And it meant so much to me.
And I think that's a good example of walking toward, even when you're not physically. I think the biggest thing to walk toward is, how can I be of service and not need anything here, right? I don't need their affirmation. I don't need them to tell me sometimes a simple text of, I'm actually going to pray for her every day, and let her know, either send a prayer through text, send a scripture, send a song, you are still very much on my mind. I see how hard this is in your life. I think sometimes it's the voice of God.
Right. And we can complicate what we should say to them. And a lot of times you just need somebody to say, I'm just so sorry.
Yes. I'm sorry. And I love you. I'm sorry you're hurting and I love you. I mean, sometimes that's really all sometimes we need to hear, because they know the person struggling, right, knows that we can't fix it. They already know that.
And the people that said, I am in this with you. I'm not going to leave you, whatever you need, that type of, just letting me know they were there. Because really, I just needed to know that somebody else was actually thinking of this situation.
Right. And it didn't go away after those first few days of like, so when something big happens, right, there's those first few days of everybody's on board, and then everybody goes to their life, but your life hasn't had time to adjust yet. And so those few people, I think, that stay in our lives that say, I recognize that months have gone by and still this is really hard.
And just saying, how are you doing? 3 months down the road, how are you feeling? It's shocking how few people do that. Really.
It really is. I appreciate you saying that.
And I think that's just a reminder to us all that we can be the people that do that.
Yeah. And we don't have to, I heard this one time and I thought it was so true. We don't have to have been best friends with the person since first grade to make a real difference. You know what I mean? Cause sometimes we're like, oh, I don't know if I know them well enough or whatever. It doesn't matter. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I heard you talk about, and you talked about in the book, is how suffering can really reveal what we truly believe. Will you speak to that just a little bit about what you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that is when we go through struggles and suffering and trials, it exposes what we really believe about God. And the reason that is because when our very life is on the line, there's nowhere else to turn, like I said before. And it exposes if we really trust him. It exposes all those things, like I was talking about in Psalm 9:10, saying that we can trust him because we know his name. Like, do we really believe that he's faithful? Do we really believe that he loves us? And, again, we've seen so many people in just being in ministry, we've seen so many people walk away from their faith when struggles came.
Yes.
And I think it exposed, the depth of their faith, and if they really trusted in who God said he was, and if it was really deep, or if it was a shallow faith. And I mean, I don't know how else to say it.
Right.
Except for, it exposes what we truly believe about God when we go through hard things.
I think, what do you think about this? I think whenever something like this happens, we all, no matter our level of faith, our depth of faith, have this experience of, you did not meet my expectations. You let me down, and I'm disappointed in our relationship right now, right? Because I thought you would take better care of me than this. But I think we have that choice that you're talking about. We can be like mad and be like, well, forget you then, if this is how we're, it's going to be. Or we can say, I actually do believe that you're faithful, but this doesn't feel faithful. And so how do I begin to search you so that I can understand your faithfulness when I don't feel it? Right. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think, again, this is the spot where there's that permission to, and it's okay not to be okay.
Yes.
And that where you can, this again is not perfect. I've said this so many times over the last month and a half. This is not, because I've even had people say to me, wow, you just must have such a strong faith. And, thank you, except for that I feel like it's a struggle. You know what I mean? Like, this was not all pretty and put together. This is a struggle, and it's okay not to be okay. This is questioning, why, God, why would you do this?
Yes.
This is saying, please, God, help us. All of these things, it's questioning, it's maybe even doubting, it's all of that, but you don't give up on God, and you keep turning to him in that. And I think that there's such a relief for people when they hear that, because honestly, that's probably what most of us experience when we go through intense suffering.
Yes.
How can you not?
Right.
And so, but I feel like when we suffer and we struggle and we wrestle with God like that, he grows us and he changes us, and so we have, and that's where the healing also comes in, because we're okay to sit in that suffering and wrestle with God through that.
And actually be able to receive some of his promises of joy and peace and hope and light, even when we don't have an answer, or even when the answer has come and it's not what we wanted. Right. And again, those things can share space. I wish this person were still here. I wish these circumstances had unfolded differently. I wish these babies had lived. And yet I feel your joy. I feel your presence. I have these things simultaneously because you are good. Yeah. I've read that your life verse is John 3:30. Is this true? He must become greater and I must become less, right? Will you talk to us a little bit about why those words, that verse, means so much to you?
Yeah. And I think actually it really plays into what we were just talking about.
Absolutely.
John 3:30, I became a Christian when I was in high school, and I wasn't really following him with my whole life at first, God, with my whole life. And I
really a teenager that wasn't following God yet.
Right. But I knew it's like I had been searching for him though my whole life. I mean, when somebody shared the gospel with me, it was like,
there it is.
There it is.
Awesome.
But I was, I think, a junior or a senior, and the youth pastor at the church I had gotten saved at sent home, I hadn't been going to youth group, and he sent home a little piece of paper with a friend of mine to give to me. And literally nothing else was written on it except for John 3:30. So I looked up the verse, and it's, he must become greater, I must become less. And that changed everything for me.
Wow.
Because for the very first time, I realized, oh my word, this isn't really about me. This is all about him. And I think that verse honestly has led me through life and through suffering, because it gives me a right. I see God in the right light, right? I surrender to him. I know that I can trust him. He's greater, I'm less. He has a plan that I can follow. And so I think, when we're talking about suffering and John 3:30, they really go hand in hand, because when I have a true understanding of who God is, and when I fear God rightly, I fear other things less. And
say that again. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. When I fear, what did I just say?
I know. When I fear God rightly, I fear other things less.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
When I have a good understanding of who he is in my life and I fear him, then I fear other things less.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that really ties into struggles and trials and suffering as well, because the truth is there's a lot of things we won't ever have an answer for. But the bottom line is I can trust him in that. Yeah. And I fear less those things because I fear him more. And I know that he has a plan and a purpose.
And if we really believe that heaven is our home, and if we really believe our place there is secure, then we actually really believe that it's going to be okay. Right? It's going to end okay because the victory is already won. And I think that when we can place confidence in that, we can, again, share space with, I don't like the way this is going. I don't like how this feels. And yet I can praise him for what I know is absolutely true that is to come. Right?
Yeah. We say in the book, our current reality is not our final reality.
Oh, yes.
And I think, that's something that we have to keep in mind. And I think when we experience the bad things of life, we desire the good even more. And that's, eternity.
Yeah. I loved what Pat said in something I was listening to earlier about how time has edges. I appreciated his comment about that. Like one of the things that this process has done for him, he was saying, is just like, living with a sense of urgency, right? Yeah. Where you're like, oh, I understand better now. Not that you can, live out every moment, everything, but that I should make conscious decisions, realizing that we don't have forever. There's no guarantee of that. And I just thought that was just a very healthy, practical thing to say. Yeah. Yeah. I want to look at a couple of comments. Jennifer says she read a quote recently. Our fears just expose the things where we have put our security in the wrong place. It's good when God opens our eyes to those things. We've put our security in something that's let us down. So God exposes that to us so we can turn to him and find him to be the best place to be our security and trust when we're suffering. Jennifer, that's good too. Yeah. Yeah. Jane says that's the most important aspect of life, recognizing who God is. So yeah, because that's the constantness, right? That's the consistency.
Yeah. If we can build our life around that, he must become greater, I must become less. Yeah. It makes life a lot easier. Yes. We don't have to find the answer to everything.
Right. And I have a verse, mine is Psalm 40 verse 2, he set my feet on solid ground and steadied me as I walked along. And for me, when I don't feel steady, it's like, it's also like a reset or a go back to. It's like, oh, the problem is you've taken your eyes off the thing, right? Like, and so it's like, remember that this is like, these words are so important to you for a reason, because this is what you struggle with. And this is how you go back to it and remind yourself, actually, my feet are planted on something that is not shaking. I might be, but it is not. Right.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So I want to change direction just a little bit because I know we're probably about out of time, but I have a little writing, a little sisterhood of writer friends. We're writers together in a group called Flourish Writers. I don't know if you're familiar with those. And so I told them I'd ask you, would you give us a writing tip? I'm sure you're asked that from time to time, but would you just what's something for it? Because I know you write all the time. What's something that works for you that you would just maybe share with us?
I think this is the most helpful thing for me, because when I sit, I have to have inspiration, I'm not the type of person, I know everybody's different, but I'm not the type of person that can just sit down. If I'm sitting down, I'm trying to think, oh, what should I write about? So what that means for me then, what really, really helps me is I get the idea when I'm driving in the car or something, what am I going to do with it then? I'm driving
in the shower.
I know, it's just come on, I can't write right now. Right. So what I've done, and I don't know, this isn't maybe other people have heard this before, but I always take note of those things because they'll be gone. Yeah. And, I'll forget in 10 minutes, not everything, but most of the time. Yeah. And so I guess that's my biggest writing tip. I think that helps me more than anything is taking a note in my notes on my phone. And I have a friend who also does the same thing. She actually takes notes of she'll have a title idea. She'll have a story comes to mind, because that's the other thing when you're trying to think of a story.
Illustrations to match. Right. Yeah.
I mean, I have so many stories and then all of a sudden I can't think of any, right?
Nothing's ever happened in my life. Right. Yeah.
I've never done anything. everything. So I think that's really, those, you don't realize how, and then you can go back to those notes, you know, so that's probably one of the most helpful things for me in writing.
Yeah, absolutely. One last question. What are you right now reading or listening to or watching that's just helping you stay connected to God? Anything that you would share with us? What's on your playlist or book on your nightstand or in your Kindle or whatever, however you do it?
Yeah. I am reading a book called I Choose Brave.
Okay.
By Katie Westenberg.
Okay.
And it's, oh my word, it is seriously probably one of the best books I've ever read. I was just
That's high praise.
I know. Wow. And I was just telling somebody that the other day. There is such a depth to this book, and it kind of goes along with the whole idea of he must become greater, I must become less.
Okay. I choose brave. I'm writing it down.
About fearing God more. So you fear other things and other people less. I guess that kind of is the whole idea of the whole book. And I didn't pick it up because I thought, oh, I need this. And I just, she had sent it to me and I, so I was reading through it and I just was like, oh my word, this is so good. It is so biblically deep and rich. And her story is woven throughout so beautifully. It's really, really well done. So I've been talking about that book.
Thank you. No, I love book recommendations, especially from people who I really respect their faith journey and their writers and readers and all that. So I do think being a reader is important when you're trying to write. Do you? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and I'm the type of person though that I always have like 6 books I'm reading at a time type of thing.
Oh, me too.
And I love historical fiction. So I do read a lot of historical fiction because I love historical fiction because I feel like it's teaching me at the same time as I'm reading a fiction book.
Have you read Becoming Mrs. Lewis by Patty Callahan?
I love that book.
Oh, she came on in June. We'd read it too. And she came on and talked to us about it in June. And I was just like trying not to fangirl, because I'm like, I just loved the book. Yeah. And I was just so delighted that she spent a little time with us. She was great. Yeah. She was so gracious. Yeah. She was really great. So Debbie's asking who was the I Choose Brave. Who's the author again? Debbie, I'll find it and put it in the Katie Westenberg. Okay. I'll find it and put it in the show notes. And so if anybody wants it. Ruth, thank you so much for your time this morning. What an encouragement you have been to us. This has been a delight and I just can't thank you enough. And thanks for those of you who were watching live this morning. I have several friends from my writing group and I just really appreciate you being with us this morning. So Ruth, I hope you have a really good rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
We're going to sign off. I know. Until next time.
Okay. See you guys later.
Peace. Wow. I am so grateful to Ruth for her openness. I love that she shared how her life verse, John 3:30, helps her see God in the right light. She said, when I have a true understanding of who God is, and when I fear God rightly, then I fear other things less. The bottom line, she reminded us, is that I can trust Him. Such true, powerful words. Thank you so much for listening. I pray that wherever your day takes you, you are walking in the confident knowledge that you are a beloved, cherished child of God. Peace.